The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Who exactly is Barack Obama? I insist, among all the other things I've called him over the years, and accurately so, that on top of that, he has a condition called megalomania. But there's a gentleman who has studied deeply his upbringing and his influences, Dr. Paul Kengor, the professor of political science, Grove City College. Doctor, how are you, sir?
Good, Mark. Great to be on your excellent show. Thanks.
Well, thank you. It's been a while, but, you know, this is perfect timing, Professor. I want you to remind my magnificent audience, there was a lot of influences on Barack Obama when he was a young man, but Frank Marshall Davis was a primary influence. Will you remind everybody who he was and how influential he was on Obama?
Yeah, I would consider Frank Marshall Davis a mentor, and in fact, I think a lot of the people who've studied Obama's background would say that, although a lot of the liberal journalists who have been biographers of Obama have avoided Frank Marshall Davis like the plague. So they would avoid the mentor word, but Davis was born in the Midwest. He eventually went to Chicago, like Obama did. He was African American, born around 1905, early 1900s, died in 1987. And when he was in Chicago, he moved very far to the left. He was first attracted to the progressive left, progressive politics, and then eventually he is attracted to the Communist Party, and at some point, definitely in World War II, and I estimate probably 1943, he actually joined Communist Party USA. And he was so radical, Mark, that Frank Marshall Davis became the founding editor-in-chief of the Chicago Star, which was the Communist Party USA publication in Chicago in the 1940s. Now, a bunch of other things. I mean, here you have him joining the Communist Party, which was completely loyal to Stalin's Soviet Union, and he joined the Communist Party while Stalin was in charge, of all things. This isn't under Khrushchev or Brezhnev.
Yeah.
This was under Stalin. And he eventually met Barack Obama when Davis left the Chicago Star to go to Hawaii and met Obama roughly the autumn of 1970, and met with Obama multiple times, long evenings, throughout the 1970s. No one's exactly sure how many times, although I see that David Marinus more recently reported upwards of a dozen, 15, 16, 17 times, something like that.
How old was Obama?
Obama would have been, this was the 1970s, so the time of about 9 or 10 years old all the way up through the time he left for Occidental College. And by the way, what's so interesting about this is the only reason that we really know this is that Obama, in Dreams from My Father, talks about Frank Marshall Davis. And in fact, he goes to get advice from Frank. That's the final thing that Obama did before he went off to Occidental College. And I should note here that Obama was still politically shrewd enough, even at that point when he wrote Dreams from My Father, that he only identifies Frank Marshall Davis as Frank. He never once in the entire book used the full name Frank Marshall Davis. And I should point out, too, that about 10 years later, when he did the audio version of Dreams from My Father, I think this was around 2005, and he had given his Democratic National Convention speech and so forth, all references to Frank, even just plain Frank, in the audio version of Dreams from My Father have been purged.
Isn't that amazing?
They're all gone. There's not one. I sat there, and I had 2 or 3 people listen to confirm it. I sat there one day with a hard copy of the book, of the original Dreams from My Father, and listened to the book on tape. And every time you would come to the section with Frank, where Frank was mentioned in the book, it would suddenly skip 3 or 4 paragraphs ahead. So he completely purged Frank Marshall Davis as he got closer to pursuing the presidency. And here he is today, and I don't know of any journalist other than perhaps David Marinus, who's asked Obama about Davis or challenged him about it or anything at all.
And does he ever talk about Davis when he was challenged?
No, not to my knowledge, and I mean he really can't. I mean if he did, I don't know what he would say about it. But Davis was so radical that, and if you read some of the if Davis is mentioned at all anywhere by liberal journalists, and they do their best to distance Obama from Davis, but they'll frame Davis as this progressive civil rights crusader who was hounded by Joe McCarthy, right, and HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. But in fact, McCarthy never got close to Davis. The House Committee on Un-American Activities never got close to Davis. It was the Democrat-run Senate Judiciary Committee which called him to Washington to testify in December 1956 and asked Davis, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Davis pleaded the Fifth Amendment, which, anybody who was in that business will tell you that typically the people who pleaded the Fifth Amendment were very often guilty. I mean, if they weren't, they would say I wasn't a member of the Communist Party. But the next year, that same Democratic Senate in 1957, in a report called Scope of Soviet Activity Inside the United States, listed Davis publicly as an identified member of the Communist Party. And he was so bad that the FBI, which has put together a 600-page file on Frank Marshall Davis, again, Obama's mentor, actually placed Davis on the federal government security index.
All right, now, Professor, I'd like to carry over, if I may.
Sure.
This was Obama's mentor, a very serious mentor with very serious ties to very bad people. I want you to hear more about this, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back.
The one-man antidote for liberal media bias. Mark Levin. Call him now at 877-381-3811.
Professor Paul Kengor, political science, Grove City College, a great college, expert on Obama's ties to, among others, Frank Marshall Davis, as well as Valerie Jarrett's ties, which I want to get to in a moment. So Frank Marshall Davis worked over Obama pretty well in Hawaii. Was that at the request of his grandparents?
Yeah, the way that they came into contact, as far as we can tell, is that Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham, was looking for a male father figure for his grandson, because the Kenyan father had split, so Obama was being raised without a dad. And of all people, Mark, you and I we might look for our grandchild if we had grandchildren, but we might look for a football coach or somebody like that. Obama's grandfather looks and finds this old Communist Party hack who was so dangerous that the FBI had placed him on the federal government security index.
Did the grandfather know about this?
He did, yeah, because
well, why would he do that?
Was really well known in Honolulu as being a communist agitator. When he left the Chicago Star, which was sold to, among others, a group of people that included one of the mentors of David Axelrod, which we can get to in a minute. But he went to Hawaii, he went to Honolulu, and he started writing for the Communist Party publication in Honolulu, which was called the Honolulu Record. He had a regular column for that. And so,
right, but what I'm trying to figure out is why would his grandfather, Obama's grandfather, turn to this man to indoctrinate his grandson?
Yeah, and it's clearly a sign, a symptom of Obama's grandfather's radicalism. In fact, we know, because people who were there and were friends of both of them said that Stanley Dunham, the grandfather, and Frank Marshall Davis would drink whiskey together, and one witness says they even smoked dope together. If you could believe that, you picture these two old men on Social Security, leftists, one a former communist, who's smoking pot together and playing cards. And I've said before that with Obama,
apparently they were way ahead of their times, weren't they?
Way ahead of their times. With Obama, we arguably have, and I know this sounds incendiary, but I think it's accurate, we arguably have our first red diaper baby president, in the sense that he's raised here by mentors and influences who were very far to the left. I mean, Obama's mother, met Obama's father in a Russian language class at the University of Hawaii in the fall of 1960. I mean, they were studying the Russian language, and we know that the father, the Kenyan father, was very radical, very pro-communist. The mother, if she wasn't flat out a communist, was at least pro-communist. The grandfather was clearly on the far left. Frank Marshall Davis, the mentor, had been a Communist Party member. So our current president is arguably a red diaper baby, and the product. And
let me just clarify. This phrase "red diaper baby" goes back to the 1940s and 50s, doesn't it?
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.